So my name is Shyam Madathil. I'm a respiratory and sleep medicine physician. I've been working with the adult clinic at Birmingham for about 15 years, I think. And the topic they asked me to talk is about having a good night's sleep, or tips for having a good night's sleep. And a good night may not be the same for everyone, but I'll just ask Mary, who works with us, what is a good night's sleep for you?
Just feeling relaxed when you wake up in the morning and knowing that, I don't know, not every bone in your body aches. Sorry, that makes sense.
So exactly. So that's what the scripture is trying to say. So if you wake up feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, ready to go, and not all achy, most people would say that's a good night's sleep. But there's a bit more to it. How quickly do you fall asleep and so on. So what we tend to sort of agree as sleep doctors is when you get into bed, you don't want to be lying there for too long. And the time it takes for you to sleep, we call it sleep latency, and normal is supposed to be about 20 minutes. So ideally, you should fall asleep within half an hour. And then once you've fallen asleep, hopefully you can sleep straight through, or you might wake up maybe once, or even twice maybe. And if you do wake up, you should be able to go and sleep again quickly, and we say within 20 minutes. And obviously, the amount of sleep needed, it differs at different ages. For an adult, we say at least 7 hours. It may be a bit more for some, it may be a bit less for some. And just because you hit the bed and you sleep straight away, it doesn't mean it's really good, because maybe you are sleep deprived, and that's why. It's a good thing to hit the pillow and straight away sleep, but it may be you are sleep deprived. And so we think if 85% of your time in bed you have slept, that's called a good sleep efficiency. That's what we do when we do sleep tests with all these wires. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't achieve it. Some people do achieve it, but they think they still have not had a good night's sleep. And that's when we try and look as to what is the problem. I'll just quickly go through some very basics of sleep. I won't spend too much time on it. We all know what happens if you don't sleep, and what all the things going wrong. There are blood tests going wrong, but we don't really know how sleep sorts all these things. We know it's needed. We know it repairs and rests not just your brain, the rest of the body as well. And there is a lot of sleep studies which shows it consolidates your memory, and you can remember things much better if you slept. And we think there are mechanisms which take away abnormal proteins, and it detoxifies things. There is more dementia, for example, in people who can't sleep, early onset, and so on. And you may have seen this picture in a lot of places. Basically, it says when it starts to get night, when the light goes off, the eyes stimulates something called melatonin to come from a gland at the base of the brain, and that's when you really start your sleep cycle in. Many things change. You usually don't open your bowels at that time. Your bowel movements are suppressed, and in the early hours of the night, the small hours, is when you have your deepest sleep. And when light comes back, melatonin stops, and things go the opposite way. Your bowel movements, you are alert, and probably the best time to do exercise is about 4 to 5 hours before you sleep. That's why most kids usually play in the evening, and so on. And so this is just to say the melatonin comes when the light stops, and it makes, through some nervous connections, makes you go and try to get to sleep. And there are signs which show you can have some foods which probably increase melatonin, might help, and so on. Basically, there are two periods where you are maximally going to fall asleep, and one is obviously early hours of the night, where is this period where your awake signal is at its lowest and your sleep load is at highest. And also often there is a dip in the afternoon, especially after you had a heavy meal, where again you tend to fall asleep. This is slightly different for teenagers. In teenagers, it's very difficult to get them out of bed in the morning. And that's because their cycle is a bit more delayed, and they are better performing usually around 10 to 1 and their afternoon slump comes a bit later. Anyways, and if you look at a full night's sleep, it goes through some stages. When this is where you're awake, and there are two main types of sleep. The one in red is when you dream, and we call it rapid eye movement sleep. And as the night goes on, you get more and more of rapid eye movement sleeps coming in. And so most people tend to dream more if they've slept longer. And if you slept too much in the morning, you sometimes wake up with more dreams. Anyway, we'll quickly move on to what we cause the sleep to be disrupted. Obviously, a lot of lifestyle things affect you. You're supposedly not to drink coffee about 5 hours before you go to bed. I know it's difficult. And alcohol at least 3 hours before you go to bed. And whatever you do, if you unfortunately have a shift job, you will never be sleeping because the rest of the world is doing things differently, and it's difficult. But other than that, obviously, anything else in the environment, too much light, noise, snoring partner, and the stress of children coming in, pets coming in, whatever. All these are difficult. But there are some specific sleep disorders, and the most common problem is insomnia, where you can't sleep, or you find difficult to either get into bed and sleep or to stay asleep. We'll skip all that, and we just say one paragraph that the commonest cause of people who are feeling too sleepy in the daytime is because you really aren't sleeping enough. And that will probably be the commonest. Some of the youngsters, if you look under their bed, it's like a city with all sorts of lights, iPad, the charging things, phones. And then there are some problems, primary sleep problems like sleep apnea, where you wake up many times because you're choking. And there are some conditions like narcolepsy, where you really have a central need for too much sleep. So those need to be treated on their own. But if you ask me for tips, the most useful thing I think is to have the same consistent routine before you go to bed. It could be different for different people. Some people, it is having a warm bath. Some others is having a glass of milk. Some people have chocolates, although it's not ideally the ideal thing to do. But having the same routine every day sort of tends to make your brain think, yes, it's time to sleep. And that clearly helps. As you ask the temperature of the room, so the bedroom should be the coldest or the coolest room in the house. And people say about 19 degrees is ideal. For Americans like Chase, it's 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And too cold isn't good, but being warmer is more difficult, really. And you should wind down before you go to sleep. So all your stress and things should be sorted before that, or leave it for the next day. And a lot has been said about blue light from laptops and phones and things, because blue light supposedly has the maximum effect on the retina like daylight, and that reduces your melatonin coming in. So try and minimize that. We already spoke about caffeinated drinks and alcohol. And if you have problems, either insomnia or otherwise, the more daytime naps you have, the more problem it will be. There are some people who may need a short nap in the afternoon, especially with some conditions like narcolepsy, but otherwise, daytime naps cause problems. And many studies show that physical exertion helps sleep, especially if you can time it well. Any time of the day is okay, but with evening exertion, things seem to be better. And obviously, you have to treat a specific underlying problem if there is that. Because insomnia is the commonest problem, a problem of being able to maintain sleep or get to sleep, I just talk a little bit on what we can do. Taking tablets for insomnia is not an answer. I mean, if you have an acute problem, for example, a bereavement, and you're stressed and you need 2 weeks of tablets, is okay. But longer term treatment for insomnia with tablets is limited to very specific groups. There are some children with autism spectrum or ADHD disorders who may get help with melatonin and tablets like that. But otherwise, in general, the treatment is you modifying your relation with sleep, your understanding with sleep, and to know that the bedroom is only for sleep and sex. You should not be having a TV in the bedroom. Even if you say, I don't usually on it, people will on it, and even if it's just the noise, it's a problem. And you shouldn't really be keeping your computer and things there. I mean, people need their phone, and they may be charging it there, but in general, your brain needs to associate the bed with sleep. That's the most important thing. And in CBT, normally it is conducted by a CBT practitioner. This is specifically for insomnia. Usually a session lasts about half to 1 hour, and most people need about 6 to 8 hours. And consistently, studies have shown 60-70% of people do improve. I mean, it doesn't work for everybody, but sleep does improve with that. And some of the things they suggest for CBT, other than you understanding this, is some behavioral changes, and I'll talk a bit on that. So the first thing is stimulus control. Stimulus control means any sort of not ideal behavior or stimulus which interferes with your sleep, you should learn to avoid. We talked about laptops and phones. Anything else, sometimes we say music helps, but there are a lot of people where the music is a problem. There are people who sleep with their radio on. We have had sleep studies done where constantly through the night we can hear the radio go on. Even if you think it's not affecting me, it will. So you need to try and avoid those sort of stimulus to the extent possible. Some people are more sensitive to light. They need to have dark curtains, especially in summer months, to try and minimize the light coming in. So all those sort of stimuli which try to prevent you sleep, you should try and get it out. The other technique is called sleep restriction. If you are just lying in bed and waiting for sleep to come, it will come to a stage that you actually dread going to bed because you just lie there and the cycle repeats. So if you find, in general, you're only sleeping for about 3 hours, what we suggest is you stay in bed for maybe 3.5 hours only. So go a bit late, stay the 3.5 hours, and then you will be sleeping more in the time you are there, and you slowly bring this up, and that's called sleep restriction. If you have some medical conditions, it may be a problem. You may be a bit sleepy for the first few days. You need to be careful about that. But just lying there, it doesn't work. You've been there 20 minutes, you get out. Don't go and drink a coffee, but you can go out, do something else, walk, read a book, come back in, and restrict the time. The other way of doing it is, especially if you're very aged, is something called sleep compression. So you don't, if you sleep 3 hours, you don't go for 3.5. But if you're lying in bed for 10 hours, lie only for 9 hours and then 8 hours and compress it and make the time you are in bed as far as possible effective. So the sleep efficiency increases. I said the 85%, and that's what we are looking at. And then quite a few relaxation techniques. Many people find breathing exercises helpful. Yoga is a big thing. My roots are from India, and I heard this yoga business for a long time, but it does sometimes work. And people do various things. They sometimes look on a wall and look at different sites in the wall and take breaths and try and control your breathing. That often helps. And sometimes you can focus on different parts of your body. You focus on your left arm first, compress the muscle, relax, and then go to your right arm and then the leg. And that sort of relaxation things. There is some role for hypnosis, self-hypnosis, and meditation and so on. I think I'll sort of stop there. There are some digital CBT tools, and the two most popularly used in the UK are sleepstation.org and Sleepio. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a lottery depending on where you live or where your NHS providers is. So it can be free in some postcodes because the ICB, the care board, has agreed into some payment negotiations. It was free in Birmingham. It's gone off free now. But these are not fully automated. They are online, they are web-based, but you can put in your details and they will give you a tailored sort of approach. So it goes in few weeks. In the first weeks, they'll try and find out what are your main causes of triggers for not really being able to sleep. And then they tell you all these things which are done over the weeks. And people do find it useful. I think before I send you all to sleep, I'll stop there. And happy to take any questions.
Can I just ask then, with the release of melatonin at night and related to the light and things, if you've got no vision, does that mean melatonin's released at different times, or?
So, actually I have something there. It doesn't really cause a problem with the melatonin release, but if you have been blind from birth, then there is a problem with the cycle. Most people who have blindness, even if you have light perception, it really doesn't interfere with melatonin. But if you have been from birth and your cycle hasn't set in, some of them have a problem with their sleep cycle, and their sleep tends to get postponed by an hour or two every day, and they lose the total circadian rhythm. But otherwise not. And melatonin has been used for treating people with blindness, and the results are not very conclusive.
Carol?
Are there any foods that can then naturally help to produce melatonin rather than going down the pharmaceutical route?
Yes, so the most reported ones are some foods with cheese and some of the Mediterranean fish sort of meals, and they increase the precursor for melatonin, the tryptamine, and so they are supposed to help. You may know that sleep is like a multi-billion-dollar industry, starting from pillows and bed sheets to all sorts of smells and scents on the beds and food tablets. Most of it don't work, but there may be some things which works for some people, and that's where we are. And there is definitely some role for food with precursors of tryptophan.
Great. Thank you very much, Shyam.
Stop there.